In this video we're going to talk about 10 functions that are typically used in Excel. So the first one that we're going to go over is the average function. So let's say we have a group of numbers 15, 27, 42, 93, 56, 84, 75, 33, and 49. If you want to find the average of these numbers, type in equal average parentheses and then highlight the column of data that you want to average, and the average of these numbers is 53.125, and so that's a very simple way in which you can use the average function in Excel. Now let's say if you want to average two numbers quickly. You can type in equal average and then let's say we want to average 100 and 200. So type in 100, 200 close parenthesis and you get 150. If you want to average three numbers, you can type in the three numbers, let's say 100, 200 and 300. The average of those three numbers is 200. So that's another way in which we can use the average function in Excel. Now the next function that we're going to talk about is the sum function. So let's say if we want to add up some numbers. So if we wish to find a sum of the numbers in this list, we can type in equal sum parentheses and then highlight the column that you want to find the sum. So the sum of those numbers is 429. And just like before, if we want to, we can just find the sum of two numbers. Let's say 50 and 125. 50 plus 125 is 175. You can also type in equal 50 plus 125. And as you can see, you'll get the same answer. Now let's say if you want to find the sum of three numbers, you can type in equal sum 100, 200, 300, and that will give you 600. Or you can write it this way, equal 100 plus 200 plus 300, and so there's different ways in which you can add up numbers using the sum function. And so that's the second function that we're going to talk about in this video. Now the third function is going to be the sum if function. So let's compare that with the sum function. The sum function allows us to calculate the sum of a range of values. Let's say if we want to find basically the sum of all of these vehicles, we can just use the sum formula. But let's say if we want to use the sum if formula, how will that help us? Let's highlight this particular cell. So I'm going to give it a yellow color. So let's say if we want to find the sum of only the Mazda vehicles. So we don't want to find the sum of all these numbers, but just basically a selected sum. We want to find the sum of a certain element in this list. So what we need to do is type in equal sum if parenthesis and then we need to select a range. So the range will be the car type and then comma, the criteria will be based on whatever is in this cell. Cell B14 and then comma the sum range. So these are the numbers that we wish to add. Close parenthesis, enter. This should be the car type actually instead of Mazda. Now we're going to put the word Mazda in this cell, and so notice that we get the total sum of all the Mazda vehicles. So that's 125 plus 142 plus 425, and you can check it if you type in equal sum 125, 142, 425, it will give you 692. Now you could change it. Let's say if we want to find the sum of the Honda vehicles, it's automatically going to adjust. There's only one type of Honda vehicle in this list. So it's 174. If we want to find the sum of all the Toyota vehicles, just type it in and it automatically gives us a sum. So we have 326 for Toyota, 89 and 274. So if we type in equal 326 plus 89 plus the other one, which is 274, we get 689. So the sum if function helps us to find the sum of a certain element in this list, rather than the sum of all of these numbers in that list. Now let's move on to our fourth function, which is going to be the count function. So how can we use the count function? The count function allows us to count. If you read it, it says it counts the number of cells in a range that contains numbers. So we can use it to count this column, and so we have a total of 10 cells that contains numbers. So this is the first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10 cells that contain numbers. Now if you try to use it with a column of data that don't contain numbers, you're gonna get a value of 0. So that's the for function or count function. It helps you to count the number of cells with numbers. The next one is the counta function or counta function. So this function allows you to basically count the number of cells that are not empty. So these could be cells with a text or a number. So if we highlight these cells, we're going to get a count of 10. Now let's say if we have Mazda, if we have a number 25, let's say we have Toyota, and then 37, and then let's say it Jim, let's say Carla 12. If we try to use the count function on this, it's only going to count two numbers because it counts 25 and 37. It doesn't count this one which contains the letters and numbers. So that's the count function. If we use the count function or the counta function, it'll count every function that is not empty. So it counts all of these functions if we try to use it on this entire range. It still gives a 6, it doesn't count the empty cells. Now there is a function that does count the empty cells. And that is the count blank function. So notice that we have 3 empty cells. 1, 2, 3, and so that's the count blank function. So now you know how to use the count and counta function in Excel. So number 6 will be the COUNTIF function. So the COUNTIF function is very similar to the SUMIF function. It allows us to count a certain selection in this entire column. So let's change this to COUNTIF, and so this is going to be equal COUNTIF, and then we need to select the range. So this will be the range, and then the criteria, which is a cell, will be whatever is in a cell B14. So notice that it tells me how many times Toyota is listed in this list, and so we have 1, 2, 3. Now let's choose Maz. Actually, let's choose something different. Let's choose Honda. Honda should be listed once. Now I'm going to add another Mazda to list. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So actually let's replace Toyota with Mazda because the selection stops here. So I have a total of 4 Mazda car types in this list. So if I change it to Mazda, it will count 4. Now I only have 2 Toyota vehicles in this list. So if I change it to Toyota, I will get 2, and so that is the COUNTIF function. So instead of counting all the car types that we have here, which should be about 10, if we use the count function, the COUNTIF function allows us to count a certain selection in that list. It can allow us to count only the Toyota vehicles or only the Mazda vehicles. So that's how you can use the COUNTIF function in this example. Next up we have our next function, which is number 7, concatenate. So let's increase the width of that column and let's turn this back into a white cell. So how can we use the concatenate function? Let's say if we have a list of names, the first name in column B and the last name in column C, and let's write some names. So let's say we have the name John Smith, let's say Kelly Williams, and then Jackie Garcia, and then we'll say Lisa Clark, and let's say David Johnson. Now let's use the concatenate function. So I'm going to type in equal, concatenate, and then parentheses, text 1, and then comma, text 2, close parentheses, and so notice that it puts the information in column or in cell B2 and it connects it with the information in cell C2, and if I want to I can extend this information. Now instead of doing that, notice that we need a space in between. So to put that space, go ahead and type in equal, concatenate again, and then we'll type in cell B2. You can just highlight it and then comma in quotations, type in your quotation mark space quotation mark and then comma cell C2, close parenthesis. So now it's going to put a space between columns B and C. So the concatenate function allows you to basically combine the information in 2 columns and connect it in 1 column. And you could put anything in between. So you can put a space or any other data that you want to put in between those 2 columns. So that's number 7, the concatenate function. Now number 8, the if function. How can we use that? So let's say if we have the name of a fruit, let's say apple, orange, lemon, or let's say banana. So equal if, so the logical tests will be based on cell B3. So if B3 is, let's say, an orange, I want Excel to tell me that it's true. If it's not an orange, I want it to tell me that it's false. So here this is false because it's not orange. I'm going to extend it. Notice that I do get a true statement for this being orange. If I change this to orange, it becomes true. If I change that to an apple, it becomes false. So that's one way in which you could use the if statement. You can also use it to say something other than true and false. So let's say if cell B3 is a lemon, so for words you need to put in quotation marks, comma. Now instead of typing true, I want to type in yes. So I have to put quotations yes. And the next one I can type in no, or I could say it is not a lemon. Whatever I decide to write here, it's going to replace the word false with that statement if it's not true. So here I don't have a lemon, so it is not a lemon. Now I can extend this. This one is a lemon. So I get an output of yes. Now there's some other ways in which we can use the if function. So let's say if we have some numbers 15, 25, 50 and 84. So let's say if equals if cell B9. Let's say if that is greater than 30. If that statement is true, I want Excel to basically perform a calculation rather than saying yes or no. And so that calculation will be, if it's true, I want Excel to multiply B9 by 10. If it's false, I want it to return a value of 0. So in this case B9 is not greater than 30. 15 is less than 30. So I got a value of 0. And now let's extend it. Here 50 is greater than 30. So this cell, it performed the calculation that I wanted to do. That is 50 times 10, I got 500. And here 84 is above 30, so it multiplied 84 by 10, giving me 840. Now let's do something else. So let's do if, and let's start with B9 again. So let's say B9 is less than 30. So this time I'm gonna want Excel to basically take B9 and multiply it by, or rather subtract it by 10. Let's do something different. And if it's false, I want it to divide B9 by 10. So here we know that 15 is less than 30. So we have the true statement, and thus we're going to subtract the B9 by 10, giving us 5. And this is less than 30, so we do 25 minus 10, giving us 15. Now for this statement is false, so we get the calculation that's involved with the false statement. 50 is not less than 30. So for the false statement, I wanted cell B11 to be divided by 10. So 50 divided by 10 is 5, and the same is true for this 184 divided by 10 as 8.4. And so you can make Excel perform certain calculations if the information in this cell is true or false, based on your parameters. So let's say if we're analyzing this cell, and let's say it has two options, yes or no. So we can write if cell B14, let's say if it's yes, so let's put that in quotations. So if we have a yes entry in cell B14, what we're going to do is we're going to take the sum of this column. If the statement is false, meaning let's say if we don't have a yes, such as let's say if we have a no, then instead of taking the sum, I'm going to take the average of this column. So this is a yes, which means I get the sum of those numbers. So if I type in equal 15 plus 25 plus 50 plus 84, I get 174. Now if I type in no, I'm going to get the average instead. So if we type in equal, average, 15, 25, 50 and 84, you'll get 43.5. So by changing yes or no, I can basically cause Excel to perform a certain calculation. The calculation if the statement is true, in this case sum, or the calculation if the statement is false, in this case average. So that's how you can use the if function in Excel. Now number 9. The VLOOKUP function. So that's the next one we're going to talk about. So how can we use the VLOOKUP function? Well, first let me fill in some information. So we're going to write the name of the individual, the email address, let's say a phone number, and also their annual revenue. I'm gonna have to make this column bigger and this one smaller. So let's say once again we have John Smith, let's say Lucy Johnson, Aaron Clark, David Wilson and Ronald James. Let's say the email for this person John s@msn.com. Let's say Lucy. Well, I don't want to do that. Let's say lucyj@live.com. And then Aaron c@gmail.com. David w@hotmail.com. And finally Ronald j@yahoo.com. And let's fill in some numbers. So let's say this is 243 and then 1257463. You could fast forward this if you like. I'll be done shortly. Let's say the revenue for John is $56,000 per year and Lucy's revenue is $74,000 per year and Aaron's revenue is $82,000 per year. Let's say David is $93,000 per year and Ronald is $47,000 per year. Now let's talk about how we can use the VLOOKUP function to look up information for these individuals. So here we're going to have the person's name, email, phone number and revenue. So let's say we want to look up John Smith. Now let's look up his email address using the VLOOKUP function. So if you type in equal, VLOOKUP, parentheses, notice that you have this lookup value and it's going to be whatever we look up in cell C8. Next we have the table array. So let's select this entire table and then the column index number. So column A is not the first column because the first column is column B, because that's the first selection in our table array. Now the email address is in column C, which is our second column. That is highlighted, and the range we have two options, true or false, but we're going to choose false for an exact match. So we have John's email, john.s@msn.com. So if we change his name to, let's say Lucy Johnson, automatically the email address will be updated. Now let's adjust the VLOOKUP function for the next cell. So the lookup value will still be cell C8, the table array will be the same, and the column index number will now be column 3 for the phone number. That's column D. That's the third column that is highlighted, and then let's choose false for an exact match. So we get Lucy's number, 352452971. Now the last thing we're going to look up is the revenue. So our lookup value is still cell C8's this same table array column index number, the fourth column that is highlighted, and then let's choose false again, so her revenue is $74,000. And let's adjust the number format. Let's click more counted formats and then let's put currency with 0 decimal places. So her revenue is $74,000. So if we change the name from Lucy Johnson to, let's say Aaron Clark, we're going to get all the information for Aaron Clark, her email address, phone number, and her annual revenue. So that's how you can use the VLOOKUP function. The next one that we're going to talk about, number 10, is the use of a drop-down list. Now the reason why this is useful is because let's say if you don't want to type in the information, if you want to just pull the name from a drop-down list, you can do that. So a quick and simple way to make a drop-down list is to click Data and then go to Data Validation, and then under the section Validation Criteria allow a list instead of any value. And then you can type in the names that you want, or you can click in this button and then selects these names and then press Enter. Okay, and now we have a drop-down list. So if I select John Smith, it automatically updates. If I select Lucy Johnson, as you can see, it updates, or David Wilson, I can get his email, phone and revenue, or finally Ronald James. And so that's the 10th useful feature in Excel. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you found it to be helpful, and if you want to find more detailed videos that I have on VLOOKUP, drop-down lists, if functions and other stuff like that, check out the description section of this video and you can find my Excel video tutorial playlist. You can also check out my channel if you want to find help in other topics. So thanks again for watching.